Connecting Who, Artificial Beings. An unofficial non-fiction reference book based on the BBC television programme Doctor Who, written by Peter Grehan and published by Candy Jar Books, Cardiff. Read by David Angus MacDonald. Introduction. As a young boy, I was an avid reader of comics. These were the British comics of low-quality paper and poor ink, but the stories more than made up for this. My regular weekly read was Lion, and one of my favourite characters in it was Robot Archie, who was always more than a match for any villain he encountered. He produced a very positive image of robots in my young mind. My love of science fiction grew with me, and I would watch any science fiction on TV that wasn't on too late or considered to be unsuitable for my age. Above all, I loved stories that had robots in them. I remember one episode of Out of the Unknown called The Prophet that featured robots. This was in 1967, and the story was an adaptation of Isaac Asimov's robot series called Reason. A year later, I saw these very same robots again in The Mind Robber. The costumes had been reused by the production team to save money. This wasn't this episode's only connection to Doctor Who, though. The theme music for that episode was called Zoozy, Zoozy, Ooh, 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 and was written and produced by Delia Derbyshire in 1966. You may remember that she was the person who, together with Ron Grainer, created the groundbreaking Doctor Who theme. I was a 10-year-old boy when I saw the very first episode, but it wasn't robots that got me hooked. Rather, it was a collection of non-humanoid cyborgs called the Daleks. The idea of cyborgs was new to me, or so I thought. They'd actually been around for quite some time, and I hadn't realized that I'd already read about them in The War of the Worlds by H.G. Wells. Doctor Who, however, was meant to teach us stuff. That's why the Doctor's very first human companions, Ian and Barbara, were teachers. Ian's subject was science, while Barbara's was history. They were included to help explain the times and science of the places the Doctor was going to visit. One of the great things about Doctor Who is the way we begin to learn stuff without us actually realizing it, and because it's fun to watch, we begin to develop a taste for learning. It stimulated an interest in me that, as I learned about science, history, and science fiction, made all sorts of connections in my mind. And that's the reason for this book. As the title suggests, I will attempt to connect the dots in the Whoniverse and discover how the concept of artificial intelligence has informed the direction of the world's best sci-fi series. In doing so, I will also explore the impact other science fiction, mythological, and historical tales have had on everybody's favorite Time Lord. Chapter 1. Robots. Automata as Myths. An extract. In 1963, the same year that Doctor Who was first broadcast, Jason and the Argonauts was released. The story centered on the classical Greek hero Jason and his search for the fabled Golden Fleece. I was desperate to see this film because, for its time, it had some brilliant special effects that included fantastical creatures from Greek mythology. These had been created by the legendary American visual effects master Ray Harryhausen. My two personal favourites from the film were the skeletal warriors that Jason and his companions had to fight, and the giant bronze statue of Talos that came to life and attacked Jason's ship, the Argo. There is something distinctly unsettling about an entity that looks human but obviously isn't. This fear has a name: automatonophobia. It means that the sufferer fears figures that represent humans, including human-looking androids. The more obvious the human qualities of the figures, the more likely people are to be unsettled by them. While few of us have the full-blown phobia, it is quite common for most people to feel hesitation or unease when encountering these figures. It is something that horror and science fiction storytellers are able to exploit to create tension and perhaps also help us come to terms with our own anxieties. Certainly, the writers of Doctor Who have made very good use of this staple of science fiction over the years. The term automata is a very general name for things that are constructed but seem to have a life of their own. These automata have a history that goes way back in time, well before the science fiction robot, as we know it today, appeared. Mechanical men are a lot older than you think. For example, in a piece of fantastical fiction entitled The True History, an ironic title by the way, a storyteller called Lucian of Samosata, a city in southeast Turkey on the upper Euphrates River, who lived between 125 AD to around 180 AD, described his travels through the ancient Greek solar system. He was like an ancient version of the Doctor, visiting alien worlds populated by strange beings. One of the places he visited was a city called Lambton, where the inhabitants were the equivalents of the robots and androids of today's science fiction. Instead of mechanical men, however, these automata were lamps that had escaped from their human owners and lived in a society that functioned in the same way as any typical city of ancient Greece, with homes, a marketplace, and very importantly, a class structure. Curiously, we see in this story an early example of the natural human inclination to mistrust any intelligent machine. Lucian and his companions are treated courteously by the inhabitants of Lambton, but they refuse the hospitality they are offered because they cannot escape the feeling of apprehension they get from these mechanical beings. Was this an early example of robophobia, or Grimwade's syndrome, as it was called in The Robots of Death? Perhaps this syndrome will replace automatonophobia as a term when robots become more common in the future. This wasn't the only example of ancient mechanical beings. Throughout myth and history, there are tales of people creating artificial humans like the Asian poem The Epic Geezer of Living, in which a talented smith builds an array of animated holy men, officials, and soldiers from gold, silver, and copper, respectively.